"Happy birthday, Daniel!" The crowd roared. Champagne fizzed over crystal flutes, and golden confetti rained down from the ceiling. My brother stood there, basking in the glow like some chosen heir, while I stayed frozen in the corner. 3. Days earlier, it had been my birthday. No calls, no cake, not even a text. Just silence. Every single year, they threw him a spectacle and erased me. But this time, as the music pounded and my parents raised their glasses for him, I felt something shift inside me. My chest didn't ache the way it usually did. Instead, it burned with a cold, clear rage. This year they would remember me, whether they wanted to or not. The truth is, I should have seen it coming years ago. Daniel had always been the golden child. He could trip over his own feet, and my mother would call it grace. He could bring home a failing grade, and my father would say, "At least he tried." Meanwhile, I was expected to achieve, to behave, to stay quiet, and even then, my efforts were dismissed as bare minimum. When I got into college on a scholarship, my parents barely mentioned it. But when Daniel made varsity soccer for one semester, they threw a barbecue for the whole neighborhood. At first, I told myself I didn't care. I told myself birthdays were just days, that parties didn't define love, that maybe I was stronger for not needing the attention. But deep down, every year it hollowed me out a little more. You start to believe what people show you, that your existence doesn't matter, that your voice doesn't deserve to be heard. Tonight, though, something cracked. I watched my mother fuss over the cake, a 3-tiered masterpiece with gold lettering that read, "To our shining star." I remembered that last week, when I shyly hinted that my birthday was coming up, she had brushed it off with, "Oh, sweetheart, you're too old for all that now." I am 27, apparently too old for cake, but never too old to play second fiddle to Daniel. My father clapped him on the back and announced to the crowd, "This is the son who will carry our name forward." The son, singular. As though I wasn't even flesh of their flesh standing 10 feet away. A few guests glanced at me with pity, and that almost stung more than the forgetting. Because pity meant they saw it too. The hierarchy, the imbalance, and yet no one said a word. I forced a smile, excused myself to the restroom, and locked the door. Staring at my reflection, the thudding bass from outside vibrating the mirror, I whispered to myself, "We're not doing this anymore." It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't a plea. It was a promise. I knew every secret of this family, every quiet cover-up, every financial string pulled, every lie dressed up as generosity. And if they couldn't acknowledge me as their daughter, maybe they'd learn to acknowledge me as their reckoning. I stayed in that bathroom longer than I should have, letting the muffled music and drunken laughter blur into a distant hum, while I traced the years of neglect in my head like tally marks on a prison wall. When I was 7, I asked for a dollhouse, the kind with little wooden furniture and pastel curtains. My father laughed and said it was too expensive. Then, a week later, bought Daniel a miniature electric car that cost twice as much. At 12, when I won a regional art competition, my mother hung the ribbon on the fridge for one day before replacing it with Daniel's participation medal from a local soccer camp. At 16, when I worked all summer to afford my own laptop, Daniel crashed the family car and they quietly bought him a new one. No punishment, no lectures. My birthdays were always bad timing. Sometimes they forgot completely. Other times they tossed me a grocery store cupcake at the end of the night, as though crumbs could replace recognition. Meanwhile, Daniel's birthdays became neighborhood. Spectacles, bouncy castles, catered buffets, fireworks in the backyard one year. Every memory stacked up like kindling. And tonight, I felt the first spark catch. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't even feel sadness anymore. Just calculation. I stepped back into the party, my face composed, my voice steady. I blended into the crowd as Daniel made a grand toast about his bright future, and everyone cheered like he was a king. But I wasn't just watching anymore. I was cataloging. The vendors my father had hired for the event, the expenses my mother pretended didn't exist, the names of the family friends who whispered about how lavish everything was while pretending not to notice the imbalance. I knew the accounts they drew from, the investments they bragged about, the secrets they thought I was too invisible to notice. My family's empire of image and indulgence rested on a foundation I had studied in silence for years. And the more I listened to their hollow praise, the more I realized I had the power to set it all on fire, not with matches, but with facts, with truth, with the kind of receipts they couldn't erase. The decision wasn't made in one dramatic moment. It had been growing all along. Tonight simply sharpened it into clarity. They had erased me, but I was about to make sure they never forgot me again. Daniel always loved the spotlight. But this year he took it further. As the DJ cut the music and the lights dimmed, my parents stepped onto the stage beside him, glowing with pride. My father tapped the mic, silencing the chatter. "Tonight," he declared, "we celebrate not only Daniel's birthday, but his future. He's joining me at the firm as a junior partner." Applause erupted, the kind that echoes with money and approval. I felt my stomach twist. Junior partner. At 24, a role I had quietly applied for months earlier, submitting polished resumes, writing sample cases, networking, grinding for recognition. I never even got a response. And now here it was, gift wrapped for Daniel like another toy. He didn't earn it. He didn't even want it. I overheard him last week telling a friend he planned to use it as a safety net while he pursued music. Yet my father was handing him the legacy I had worked toward for years. I stood frozen, champagne flute trembling in my hand, but no one noticed. Why would they? My mother hugged Daniel, tears in her eyes, saying, "We always knew you. We're destined for greatness." That line sliced through me like glass, because I realized, in all of my years, I had never once heard her say the word greatness about me. My throat burned, but not from tears, from fury. I forced my face into a polite mask, but inside I was already moving pieces into place. I had saved every rejection letter, every pay stub proving how I pulled myself up without their help, every screenshot of Daniel bragging about blowing through money they funneled to him. I had tax documents showing my father writing off parties as business expenses, proof of accounts they hid from the IRS. For years, I thought collecting these scraps was just my way of coping, a secret record that said I existed. But tonight, I understood their real value. As the crowd cheered Daniel and cameras flashed, I slipped away to the coat room, phone in hand, scrolling through the carefully organized folders I'd built. Evidence, receipts, history they couldn't deny. This wasn't about revenge born from pettiness. It was survival. It was self-respect. And for the first time, I wasn't the forgotten daughter. I was the one holding the detonator. I slipped back into the ballroom and leaned against the wall, watching Daniel lap up the attention like it was oxygen. People lined up to shake his hand, congratulate him, promise future partnerships with the firm he hadn't even stepped into yet. My father strutted beside him like a proud general presenting his heir, and my mother floated from guest to guest, whispering about Daniel's natural talent. None of them noticed me. None of them ever did. That invisibility used to break me. Now it protected me. It gave me cover. I studied every face, every handshake, every deal sealed with a smile. My phone buzzed in my clutch. An email draft I had prepared months earlier sat waiting. It contained everything. Screenshots of offshore transfers, evidence of misused charity, funds the Lavish party invoices marked as client entertainment. At the bottom was a clean list of every journalist and IRS contact I had compiled over the years. All it needed was my finger on the screen. I closed the email, not yet. Timing was everything. If I pressed send now, they'd call it jealousy, bitterness, a tantrum over a forgotten birthday. But if I waited, if I let them keep underestimating me, the blow would land harder. I wanted them blindsided, their world collapsing at the precise moment they believed they were untouchable. The coat room door swung open and I stiffened. It was Daniel. He smirked when he saw me, the same crooked grin he wore when we were kids, and he stole the last slice of cake from my plate. "What are you doing back here, sulking?" he teased, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "Oh, right. Your birthday. Was what? Last week? Sorry, sis. Guess Mom and Dad are just too busy celebrating the important one." His words dripped with the kind of careless cruelty that only comes from someone who's never been told no in his life. I didn't rise to the bait. I didn't even look at him. I just smiled faintly at my reflection, a smile that made him frown. Because for the first time, he couldn't read me. He didn't know that behind that quiet smile, I had already chosen my moment. He straightened his jacket and swaggered out. No idea he had just signed his own downfall. The trigger came faster than I expected. After his smug exit from the coat room, Daniel reappeared on stage, microphone in hand, swaying slightly from too much champagne. "I just want to thank my amazing parents," he slurred, "for always believing in me, for making tonight perfect, for reminding me I'm the real legacy of this family." Laughter and applause erupted, but he wasn't done. He raised his glass, eyes scanning the crowd until they landed squarely on me. "And let's not forget my sister. What's her name again?" The crowd chuckled nervously, unsure if it was a joke, but Daniel grinned wide, soaking in the cruelty. "Just kidding. Of course I know her name. It's irrelevant." He drained his glass, and the crowd, eager to stay in his good graces, laughed again, louder this time. My chest tightened, not from shame, but from the electric snap of clarity. That was it. Years of erasure, of being the afterthought, distilled into one public humiliation. My parents clapped along, smiling indulgently, not even flinching at his mockery. In that moment, I realized they weren't blind to how they treated me. They enjoyed it. My invisibility was convenient for them, and Daniel's spotlight was their pride. They had chosen their heir, and I was nothing but a shadow. I felt the decision harden in me like concrete. I didn't yell, didn't storm out, didn't cry. I smiled. I clinked my glass softly against a nearby table, as though toasting right, along with them. Inside, I was already moving forward, already picturing the chain reaction when the truth dropped. Daniel thought tonight crowned him. My parents thought they had secured their legacy. But in reality, tonight had signed their obituary. I kept my smile plastered on as Daniel stumbled through his speech, soaking in every drop of false admiration. But inside, my thoughts were razor sharp. That irrelevant line should have crushed me, should have turned me into the forgotten child I'd always been, but instead it snapped the last thread tying me to their approval. I no longer needed them to see me. I needed them to feel me. The decision solidified. I would not walk away quietly this time. I waited until the music swelled again, the crowd returning to their champagne and gossip, and slipped through the hallway toward my father's study. The house was alive with noise, but in that paneled room lined with leather-bound books and framed awards, it was quiet, almost reverent. I had been in there hundreds of times as a child, always told not to touch, not to ask, not to question. Tonight I went straight to the desk. I knew the drawers. I knew the safe behind the false panel. Years of watching from the sidelines had taught me their every habit, every hiding place. Inside lay files, contracts, documents my father never imagined I'd know how to decode, but I'd spent years studying, learning, preparing. My phone camera clicked as I captured page after page, tax evasion, fraudulent write-offs, shady consulting fees funneled to shell accounts. Each flash of evidence made my heart steadier, not faster. I wasn't panicking, I wasn't second-guessing, I was building. Brick by brick, receipt by receipt, a case that would be undeniable. By the time I returned to the party, my clutch was heavier with secrets than with the lipstick and keys inside it. Daniel was back to basking, my parents laughing beside him, the three of them framed in flashing lights. No one noticed me re-enter. Perfect. Because when I finally pressed send, they wouldn't just notice me, they'd never forget me again. The first confrontation came sooner than I expected. As I blended back into the crowd, I caught sight of my aunt, one of the few relatives who ever bothered to look me in the eye. She pressed a glass of water into my hand and whispered, "I don't know how you stand it." Her words nearly undid me, but I only nodded. I couldn't risk slipping. Not yet. Daniel spotted us and swaggered over, his arms slung across my shoulders as though we were close. "You see this?" he told her loudly. "My little sister, always hiding in the shadows. But hey, she's good at it. Every family needs a background. Character, right?" My aunt's lips tightened, but before she could defend me, I peeled his arm off with a calm precision that made him blink. "Don't touch me," I said softly, just for him, my eyes steady. For the first time that night, his smirk faltered. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply walked away, leaving him staring after me, unsettled by the lack of reaction he expected. That was the first ripple. The second came when my father cornered me near the buffet, his tone low and commanding. "Don't ruin this night. For your brother," he warned. Not a word about me, not a question about how I was. Just a command to stay silent, to stay erased. I smiled, my voice smooth as glass. "I won't ruin it, Dad. I'll let him enjoy it fully." He nodded, satisfied, never realizing that my words meant the opposite of what he heard. My phone vibrated again in my clutch, a reminder I had set weeks ago for this exact hour. A failsafe. The email draft was timed to send automatically if I didn't cancel it. I glanced at Daniel basking in the glow of his guests, my parents circling him like satellites, and I made my choice. I didn't cancel. The fallout didn't take hours. It took minutes. My phone buzzed as the email left my outbox, multiplying. Itself across every contact I'd queued. Journalists, auditors, investigators. At first, nothing changed inside the ballroom. The music thumped, guests danced, Daniel basked. But then I saw it. A man in a dark suit stepping through the front doors, flashing a badge at security. Another one followed. Phones started buzzing. Across the crowd, notifications lighting up screens. Whispers rippled through the room as guests scrolled through their news apps, eyes darting toward my parents. Headlines spread like wildfire. Local firm under investigation for fraudulent accounts and tax evasion. Photos of tonight's party already attached. Invoices leaked, names spelled out clearly. My father's face drained of color as his phone erupted with calls. My mother clutched his arm, hissing, "Not here, not tonight." But the walls were already closing in. Daniel tried to keep the crowd's attention, raising his glass for another toast, but the guests had shifted, murmurs drowning his voice. A few slipped out quietly, others avoided his gaze. No one laughing anymore. The DJ cut the music halfway through a track, uncertain. Then the men in suits approached my father. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the way his posture crumbled, the way he shook his head and gestured desperately toward the crowd. My mother followed them, whispering furiously, while Daniel stood abandoned on stage, microphone limp in. His golden spotlight had turned harsh and cold, exposing everything he'd built his arrogance on. And me? I stood at the edge of the room, sipping my champagne with a calm I'd never known before. For the first time in my life, they saw me. Not as an afterthought, not as irrelevant, but as the reason their empire had cracked. And none of them even suspected it was my hand that had pulled the thread. Daniel's voice cracked through the silence, desperate and raw. "This is a mistake. My father's firm is respected. We don't do fraud." But no one clapped, no one cheered. A few cameras lifted instead, recording his unraveling. My father snapped, "Put the mic down, Daniel." But it was too late. The image of him stammering on stage, face pale and sweaty, was already stamped into the minds of everyone who had once worshipped him. My mother tried damage control, pulling important guests aside, whispering that it was all a misunderstanding, but their polite smiles were masks stretched too thin. I moved through the crowd unnoticed, every step deliberate. Years of invisibility had taught me how to vanish in plain sight, and now it was my shield. I watched as one of the investigators handed my father a sealed envelope. Summons, I guessed. While another gestured toward the files I knew would match exactly the documents stored in my phone. Daniel stormed off the stage, shoving through the guests until he reached me. His eyes blazed. "Did you know about this?" he hissed. His breath reeked of champagne, his bravado cracking into fear. I tilted my head, met his gaze, and for once he faltered. "I don't know, Daniel," I said softly. "Maybe the world doesn't revolve around you after all." His jaw worked, searching for the old smirk, but it wouldn't come. My father barked at him from across the room, summoning him like a child. And for the first time, I saw Daniel hesitate, the golden child, lost. The crowd was thinning fast now, allies evaporating, promises of partnership dissolving into silence. My parents clustered with him, their perfect trio broken under the fluorescent glare of exposure, and I walked right past them, calm, steady, invisible no longer. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Headlines screamed about financial misconduct, leaked invoices, and extravagant parties charged as business expenses. Photos from last night circulated online. Daniel with his glass raised, high, my parents glowing beside him, oblivious to the storm already breaking over their heads. Reporters camped outside their house, neighbors whispered, clients began to cut ties. The empire they'd built on image was rotting in public view. I watched it all unfold from my apartment, phone buzzing nonstop with updates. For once, the silence on my birthday didn't hurt. It felt like a shield, a private satisfaction. At noon, my mother called. I let it ring out. 10 minutes later, my father tried. Straight to voicemail. Daniel sent a string of texts. What did you do? You ruined everything. Do you feel better now? I didn't reply, because this wasn't about feeling better. It was about balance. For 27 years, I had been erased, but now their names were dragged through the mud while mine stayed untouched. They couldn't pin it on me, not without admitting I had been watching all along. That night, I took myself to dinner, a small table by the window at a quiet restaurant, a single candle flickering beside my plate. The waitress smiled and said, "Celebrating something?" I thought about lying, but instead I said, "Yes, my birthday." She brought me a slice of cake on the house, a tiny thing with a single strawberry on top, and I laughed softly as I made a wish. Not for their approval, not for their love, for freedom. And as I blew out the candle, I realized I had already granted it to myself. The investigations widened like cracks in ice. Within a week, the firm my father built was placed under federal review, its accounts frozen, partners fleeing to protect their own reputations. The same neighbors who once praised my parents' success crossed the street to avoid them, whispering behind cupped hands. I heard from my aunt that my mother stopped showing her face at the country club, ashamed of the stares. While my father paced the house in rages, his phone calls going unanswered by the very people who had once begged for his attention. And Daniel, oh Daniel, he was drowning the fastest. The promotion he bragged about evaporated overnight, the firm distancing themselves with a cold statement about internal irregularities. The music gigs he thought would carry him dried up too, venues canceling after the scandal stained. His name. He called me again, this time sobbing, his voice small and raw. "You don't understand. They'll blame me for everything. I don't know what to do." I listened in silence, remembering the dozens of birthdays where he never even acknowledged me, the countless times he laughed at my invisibility. For a moment, a sliver of pity pricked at me. But then I remembered his words on stage. Irrelevant. And pity turned to steel. "You'll figure it out," I said calmly, and ended the call. My parents tried different tactics with me. First silence, then anger, then finally bargaining. "We're still your family," my mother pleaded on voicemail. "We can fix this together." But I knew what together meant in their language. It meant me cleaning up their mess while they took the credit. Just like always. Not anymore. I didn't gloat. I didn't spread the word that it was me behind the leak. I didn't need to. My revenge wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about finally being heard, even in silence. And for the first time in my life, I held that power in my hands. And I wasn't letting it go. By the time subpoenas started landing on their doorstep, my parents had shifted from denial to strategy, which in their language meant calling me like I was the family's quiet fix-it machine. My father left a voicemail at 11:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, voice ironed flat. "We need a letter from you for the record. Character reference, nothing complicated. You'll say the firm's books were always handled properly." My mother followed, with tears about what families do for each other. I listened to both twice, then opened my laptop and drafted the opposite. A sworn statement, 5 pages, exhibits labeled A through K, attaching the very invoices they'd coded as client entertainment, screenshots of emails where my mother asked vendors to keep it off the books, and a neat ledger of the last 6 quarters where party costs appeared next to charitable write-offs. The zip file was 312 MB. It took 9 minutes to upload to the investigator's secure portal. I did not shake. I did not hesitate. I pressed send and went for a walk. Around the block, breathing like I finally had lungs. 2 weeks later, at the first hearing, I took a seat in the second row, nondescript black blazer, hair tied back. My father walked in with a lawyer whose watch cost more than my rent. My mother wore quiet pearls and the face she saved for church. Daniel hovered behind them, thinner, washed out, his once cocky stride replaced with a shuffling uncertainty. When my father glanced into the gallery and saw me, his mouth moved around my name without sound. I didn't look away. The prosecutor summarized the allegations: fraudulent deductions, misclassification of personal expenses as business costs, a charitable foundation used as a pass-through. Nothing cinematic, just line items and dates, the kind of boring truth that buries reputations. My father pled not guilty and stared straight ahead. My mother kept her eyes on the table. Daniel chewed his lip until it bled. When it was over, my father approached me in the hallway as if we were strangers who happened to share a face. "This can still be handled privately," he said. I waited for the old instinct to smooth things over, to make myself small. It didn't come. "We're not doing this," I said, level. He blinked, confused by the sentence that used to mean I'd do anything to avoid a scene. "You'll regret this," he snapped. I thought of 27 birthdays blended into wallpaper and decided regret had already been spent. The consequences, stacked in ordinary, relentless ways. The foundation paid fines and returned funds. My mother relinquished her board seat and accepted 200 hours of community service at a clinic that didn't care about her pearls. My father accepted a deal: 18 months probation, restitution, barred from serving as a fiduciary for 5 years. There was no orange jumpsuit, no dramatic perp walk, just the slow grind of credibility collapsing. Clients migrated. Bame wads. Name that once opened doors began to stall elevators. Daniel's fall was quieter and somehow louder. The junior partner announcement vanished from the firm website within 48 hours, replaced by an oblique sentence about restructuring. Promoters stopped returning his calls. He sold the car he bragged about, then the custom guitar. He texted me long apologies at 3:07 a.m., each one a frantic rewrite of the last. I didn't mean irrelevant. I was drunk. It was a joke. I've always looked up to you. Please call. I waited until morning and sent one reply, measured and true. I don't accept apologies that only arrive when the spotlight turns. He offered to pay me back for everything. I sent him an invoice. Not rage, not theater, just math. 3 entries, the emergency credit card payment I covered when he was 21 and forgot to transfer his half, the security deposit I fronted when he bailed on our lease, the studio bill he promised to repay when the EP drops, principal plus interest at a modest annual rate, copies of bank transfers attached, due in 30 days. When he missed the deadline, I filed. In small claims, no drama, no audience. The judgment arrived in the mail with a number at the bottom he could not charm his way out of. He paid in 2 installments and, for the first time in our lives, said my name like it belonged to someone real. My mother tried one more angle, showing up at my apartment with a faded photo of me at 5 in a paper crown from a grocery store. Sheet cake. "See?" she whispered, pressing it into my palm. "We celebrated. You remember, don't you?" I looked at that little girl with frosting on her chin and the intensity of someone who had already learned to look after herself. I handed the photo back. "I remember teaching myself not to need things you didn't give," I said. She cried in the hallway while my neighbor unlocked his door and pretended not to look. I locked mine and slid the chain. Not because I feared her, but because I was done hosting ghosts. The last tether snapped the day my father's attorney emailed asking if I'd consider a letter to the licensing board to contextualize my father's conduct. I drafted one. It read, "Context. For 27 years, I was erased in favor of image. When the image demanded deceit, I declined to participate. I hope you do the same." I did not send it to the board. I sent it to my father. He didn't reply. After that, there was space. Not emptiness. Room. I changed the lock that still matched my parents' spare, returned their house key in a plain envelope with no note, and set my phone to filter their numbers to a folder labeled Archive. I took a job offer at a firm across town where no one knew my last name, just my work. On my next birthday, I didn't wait to be remembered. I booked a table for 6 and invited people who say my name out loud, even when no one is listening. The guwup aunt who handed me water at the party, a coworker who holds the elevator, the neighbor who pretended not to see my mother cry, but later knocked to ask if I was okay. I brought my own cake with my own money and my own handwriting on top. I lit 7 candles, one for every year I could clearly remember being forgotten, and one for every year after this where I wouldn't be. When I blew them out, I didn't make a wish. I made a list. Therapy appointments booked, savings automated, a weekend trip alone to a coastline I'd only ever seen in other people's photos, a new email rule that moved urgent family matters to the same folder as spam. The story didn't end with sirens or a mansion sold at auction. It ended at my kitchen table on a quiet Sunday, where I opened a blank document and started writing the kind of record I used to hoard in secret. Not receipts to prove I existed, but plans for a life that does not require anyone's permission. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I turned the key and left the stage they'd kept me off of for years. Family, I learned, is not a crown you inherit. It is a set of people who put your name on a cake without being told. I was never irrelevant. I was the entire power cut to a house wired wrong. And if you're wondering whether I went too far or not far enough, tell me this. If it were you standing under confetti meant for someone else, would you have pressed send? Tell me in the comments.